Imagine waking up to a normal morning, only for it to spiral into a nightmare. Noah's mother, pregnant and fragile, suddenly collapses right before his eyes. Desperate, he calls 911 thinking help is on the way. But the operator's chilling response, and what happens next, will leave you questioning everything. Can a child's love and courage be enough to save his mother, or is something much darker at play? Stay tuned. It was a quiet morning, the kind where everything feels perfect, untouched by the chaos of the world. The sun's early light filtered through the window, casting soft golden beams across the room. The birds were chirping outside, and there was a gentle rustle of leaves in the cool morning breeze. In the corner of the living room, a little boy, no older than 10, was sprawled out on the couch, his toys scattered around him. He wasn't paying much attention to the world outside. His focus was on the simple joy of his playtime. The day was peaceful, almost too peaceful. His name was Noah, a quiet, thoughtful child who loved his morning routines. He'd wake up, eat his cereal, and get lost in his little world of imagination for a while before his mom would ask him to help with something around the house. Today, though, was different. He couldn't quite place why, but there was a subtle shift in the air. It was as though the universe had taken a deep breath before something monumental happened. Noah glanced over at his mom, who was standing in the kitchen, humming to herself as she prepared breakfast. Her soft, round belly, now nearing the final stages of pregnancy, was a constant reminder to Noah of the little life growing inside her, his baby brother. He could already picture what their life would look like once his mom gave birth. He imagined the crib, the soft lullabies, and the laughter that would fill the house. But something wasn't right. Noah stood up from the couch, instinctively sensing that something had shifted. He crept quietly toward the kitchen, wondering if his mom needed help. His footsteps were soft on the wooden floor, but the silence that enveloped the house felt heavier than usual. As he rounded the corner into the kitchen, his eyes landed on his mom. But what he saw made his heart stop. She was lying on the floor. At first, Noah thought she was playing a game, but as he took a step closer, his stomach twisted with dread. His mother wasn't moving. Her face was pale, and she was clutching her stomach, her breathing shallow and erratic. Panic surged through Noah's chest as he rushed to her side, calling her name. "Mom!" he shouted, his voice trembling with fear. But there was no response. He shook her gently, his hands trembling. She barely stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and when she saw Noah, she smiled weakly, her lips barely forming the words. "Noah, honey, please, call 911, she whispered, her voice a strained, breathless whisper. Noah's heart sank into his stomach. His mind raced with confusion. His mom, the one person who had always been strong, always knew how to make him feel safe. She needed help, and fast. Without thinking, Noah rushed to grab the phone. His fingers fumbled in his panic, the phone slipping slightly from his grasp as he dialed 911. The world around him seemed to blur, and all he could hear was the ringing of the phone in his ear, as if it was the only thing tethering him to reality. His breath came in quick gasps as the phone finally connected, and the operator's voice on the other end seemed to pull him back into the moment. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice was calm, professional, but to Noah it felt distant, cold, like the warmth of the morning had been stolen from him. My mom, she's pregnant and she's hurt. She's not moving and she's in so much pain. His voice cracked, and he could feel the panic rising up his throat, choking him. Please, help her. Please help us. The line crackled slightly as the operator spoke. "All right, stay calm. Tell me your address." Noah's mind raced. His address, he knew it. He'd said it 1,000,000 times before. But now, with his mom lying motionless on the floor, it felt like the words were stuck in his throat. 1228 Oakwood Avenue. He stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Please, hurry. I don't know what to do. She's not okay. She's breathing slow, and she's getting weaker." His words tumbled out in a jumbled rush, but the operator's tone didn't change. She didn't seem alarmed, not in the way he thought she would be. The urgency he felt wasn't reflected in her voice. "All right, stay on the line," the operator said, her voice almost mechanical. "I'm sending help, but I need you to answer some questions first." Noah's heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't stop shaking, couldn't stop glancing back at his mother, whose face was now twisted with pain. "Please, don't make her wait," Noah whispered as his eyes filled with tears. The operator didn't respond immediately. She asked questions about his mom's condition, her breathing, her movements. But Noah's answers felt empty, like they weren't enough. His mind was consumed with one thing only. His mother was slipping away, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The ringing in Noah's ears seemed louder than the voice of the operator on the other end of the line. His hands, slick with sweat, gripped the phone tightly as his mind raced. His mom's pained breaths echoed in his ears, and each shallow gasp she took seemed to stretch time. She was slipping. Slowly but surely she was slipping away, and Noah was helpless to stop it. He could hear the operator's voice, detached and methodical, coming through the phone, but it felt so distant, so cold. The urgency in his voice seemed lost in the clinical tone of the 911 dispatcher. "911, what's your emergency?" the operator had asked. Her voice was calm, almost too calm, as if this was just another routine call. But Noah couldn't hear her over the pounding of his heart. His breath came in short, panicked bursts. "My mom, she's pregnant and she's not moving," Noah managed to choke out. His voice cracked, desperation rising in his throat as he glanced at his mother, her face pale and clammy, her body trembling with every shallow breath. She's hurt, I think. She can't breathe right. She's in pain. She's not okay." The operator's response came quickly, almost mechanical. "All right, stay calm. Tell me your address." Noah's fingers fumbled over the phone screen. He was shaking too much, his thoughts tangled in a knot of panic. He could barely see the numbers, his vision blurry from the tears welling up in his eyes. He looked back at his mother. Her breathing was slow, too slow. Her lips were a pale shade of blue, and the pain was evident on her face. 1228 Oakwood Avenue. Noah gasped out, his throat tight with fear. The words felt too simple, too insignificant. Wasn't there more to say? Wasn't there something he could do to make them hurry? The clock on the wall seemed to mock him as each second ticked by slowly, dragging him deeper into his panic. The operator didn't sound frantic, didn't seem to grasp the urgency in his voice. "Stay on the line. I'm sending help, but I need you to answer some questions first. Is she breathing? Is her chest rising and falling?" "You need to be sure," the operator asked, her voice as calm as it had been since the start. Noah took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves, his hands shaking as he peered down at his mother. Her chest was barely rising, and the small, shallow breaths she took seemed more like gasps for air. Her eyes flickered open for a moment, and she reached out weakly, her hand brushing against his. I don't know," he stammered. Her chest it's moving but slow, like she can't catch her breath. What's happening to her? Please help her. His voice broke, the fear and helplessness too much to contain. He could feel the panic swelling up inside him, choking him. The operator's voice remained steady, unmoved. Listen to me carefully, Noah. You need to remain calm. Panic makes things worse. We need to gather as much information as possible so the paramedics can get to you faster. Faster? Noah's thoughts screamed. He couldn't breathe. The seconds felt like hours, and yet the operator continued asking question after question, her voice still mechanical, as if he were a subject in a science experiment. What's she wearing? What's her condition like? Does she have any medical history you know about? Please, she's in pain. Noah pleaded again, the words escaping in a torrent. I think she's dying. His throat burned from the strain of speaking, his voice desperate. The operator paused. For a brief moment, there was a strange silence. Then she spoke, her tone sharp and purposeful. Stay with her. Keep her as still as possible, Noah. We're sending help right now. They'll be there soon. Noah's heart skipped a beat. But what if it's too late? He whispered, his voice barely audible. The words hung in the air like a dark cloud, heavy and suffocating. Just stay calm, the operator repeated, her voice starting to show just a hint of urgency. Stay on the line. Do you have a pen and paper? I need you to write down some instructions in case you have to help her right away. It's important. Write this down, the operator's voice continued. Tell her to breathe slowly and deeply. Try to keep her calm. Do not let her fall asleep. Do not let her lie flat. Keep her upright. Noah's hands were trembling too much to write, but he did his best, his mind reeling from the panic, trying desperately to follow every instruction. I'm doing everything I can, Noah whispered, tears streaming down his face. His mother was slipping away, and all he could do was wait for help to arrive. The phone felt heavier in Noah's hand with each passing second. His mother, barely conscious, still lay motionless on the cold kitchen floor. Her breaths came in shallow, uneven intervals, each one more labored than the last. Noah's mind raced, but no matter how fast his thoughts spun, it all came back to one thing. His mom was slipping away, and he couldn't do anything to stop it. He clutched the phone tighter, his knuckles white, his heart pounding in his chest. The operator's calm, distant voice echoed in his ear, offering a strange, dissonant comfort amidst the chaos. She was giving instructions, but somehow the urgency in his voice felt like it was being swallowed whole by her detachment. There was no panic in her tone, no sense of urgency, just cold, methodical questions and directives. It felt wrong. Do you have a pen and paper, Noah? The operator asked again, her voice crisp and unwavering. I need you to write down some instructions in case you have to help her right away. It's important. The operator's voice continued, unfazed by the turmoil she was guiding him through. Noah, listen carefully. Do not let her lie down. Keep her upright. If she feels dizzy or short of breath, you need to help her sit up or support her in a more comfortable position. Can you do that? Noah swallowed hard. I don't know how long she has, Noah whispered, his voice cracking. Please, she's dying. You have to send someone now. The operator's response was so cold, so clinical, it took him a moment to realize she hadn't heard his desperation at all. Noah, she said, almost soothingly, as if she were speaking to a child. I understand that this is difficult, but I need you to stay calm. Panic only makes things worse. We're sending paramedics, but we need to keep things as steady as possible for your mom." "No," Noah cried, his voice rising in panic. "You don't understand. You don't understand. She's barely breathing. She's in pain. She's my mom. You have to help her. Now." But the operator remained calm, eerily calm. There was no shift in her tone, no change in the rhythm of her speech. "I understand you're scared, Noah," she said as if the words were rehearsed. "I need you to focus on the instructions I gave you. The paramedics are on their way. You need to stay with your mom. Keep her comfortable and do not let her fall asleep." Noah's chest tightened with frustration. His mind was screaming, "This isn't enough." Her words weren't enough. He couldn't just sit there and watch his mom struggle, fading before his eyes, with nothing but instructions to follow. Every second felt like a lifetime. How could she be so cold, so detached, when his world was crumbling around him? His hand gripped the phone tighter, knuckles white, as he watched his mother fight for each breath. Tears blurred his vision, and he could barely focus on the words the operator was saying anymore. "There's something wrong with her. I know it," he exclaimed, his voice rising with fear and anger. "You don't understand. She's in pain. It's not just normal pregnancy stuff. She's in real trouble. She could be dying." The operator's voice remained eerily calm. "I understand your concern, but unless I have more details, I can't help you further. I need you to answer some questions first." Noah's stomach turned. More questions? His mother was slipping away with every passing second, and the operator was asking questions. Wasn't it obvious? Didn't she hear the desperation in his voice? He didn't know how much longer she could hold on, but the operator continued, methodical and detached. "Is she having any contractions, Noah? Any signs of labor?" Noah blinked, taken aback by the question. Labor? His mother wasn't due for weeks. What was this woman talking about? But the urgency in her question kept him from dismissing it completely. He looked at his mom's stomach, her breathing quickening in between the heavy gasps. I don't know," Noah stammered, voice breaking. "She was just standing there and then she fell. And now she's..." The operator's voice continued without skipping a beat. "Noah, listen to me carefully. There's a chance this could be something more serious. You need to keep her still and try to calm her. Do you have any other family nearby? Anyone who can help you?" Family? There was no time for that. No time for questions about whether his uncle or his aunt could come. His mom was fading in front of him, and all he could do was hold the phone to his ear, waiting for something, anything, that would make this nightmare stop. But the operator's voice never wavered. "I understand this is frightening, but you need to remain as calm as possible. The paramedics are on their way. It won't be long. Stay with her, Noah," the operator instructed, her tone unchanging. "Keep her still. Don't let her fall asleep. We're sending help." "Is your mother on any medication, Noah?" the operator asked, her voice still perfectly calm. "No," Noah said, his voice shaky but certain. "No, she's not on any medication. She's healthy. She's never been sick before. Just the normal stuff, you know. Cold, flu, but nothing serious." His words stumbled out in a rush, his mind struggling to make sense of it all. But the operator didn't respond the way he expected. There was no reassurance, no acknowledgement of his answer. Instead, there was a slight pause, as if she was processing what he'd said, but it felt like something else. A shift, a change in the conversation that left Noah with an uncomfortable chill crawling up his spine. "Do you know if she's been drinking enough water today?" the operator asked, her voice still as steady and unshaken as before. Noah's head spun. Water? He could barely focus on her question, barely grasp the logic behind it. Was this really what mattered right now? His mother was on the edge of death, and the operator was asking him about hydration? I don't know, Noah muttered, his voice cracking. She was just making breakfast. She looked fine earlier. Please, what does this have to do with anything? His mind was racing, trying to make sense of her questions, but it felt like they were leading him in circles. The operator's response was cool, calculated. I need to know, Noah. Every piece of information helps the paramedics prepare. But Noah wasn't listening anymore. Her calm, detached questioning was slowly driving him to the edge. It felt like she wasn't hearing him at all, like her questions had become a mechanical part of the process, just another box to check. He couldn't understand how someone could be so cold while his mother lay dying on the kitchen floor, fighting for each breath. In that moment, he felt more alone than he ever had in his entire life. His mom was fading, and all he could do was answer her questions like a robot, like an object, as if he wasn't the one watching his world crumble before him. Please, just help her, Noah begged, his voice breaking. The tears he'd been fighting for so long finally came, and he couldn't stop them. She's in pain. She needs you. For the first time since the call began, there was a slight shift in the operator's tone. It wasn't warmth, exactly, but there was a subtle hint of something. Was it regret? A trace of humanity? Something Noah hadn't heard until now. I understand you're scared, Noah, she said, her voice softer now, almost as if she were speaking through a filter. But we need to keep things clear. Stay focused. The paramedics are on their way. We need you to answer everything. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. The question, the coldness, the impersonal tone, it had already shattered something inside Noah. All he wanted was someone to tell him it would be okay. He wanted to hear something that would stop his mind from spiraling. But the only thing he heard now was the distant sound of sirens, a promise of help that felt too little, too late. And all the while, his mom's breaths grew slower, weaker, as Noah clutched the phone in his shaking hands, desperately hoping that somehow, just somehow, someone would come before it was too late. No, stay with me, Mom, Noah whispered, his voice breaking as he knelt beside her. His heart was pounding in his chest and the fear was unbearable. But even in the midst of it all, he knew one thing. He couldn't wait for someone else to save her. He had to act. He slammed the phone down on the counter, ignoring the operator's faint voice still coming through the receiver. No more waiting. He couldn't stand the helplessness anymore. His mom needed help, and he was the only one there. He couldn't trust anyone else to save her. Not the operator, not anyone else. He was the one who had to be strong. He was the one who had to take control. He stood up quickly, glancing around the room as his mind scrambled for a plan. He knew his mom's condition was serious. He'd seen enough to know that. Her lips were now blue, her breaths barely noticeable. She was going in and out of consciousness. But something in his gut told him that if he didn't do something now, if he didn't take matters into his own hands, it would be too late. The first thing that came to his mind was the first aid kit. Where was it? He knew there was one in the closet in the hallway, tucked behind the door. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. His pulse raced as he sprinted to the closet, ripping open the door and pulling out the kit. His hands were shaking so badly that it was hard to even open it. He fumbled with the lid, trying to get to the supplies. His thoughts were a blur. He couldn't think straight. He just needed to act. Inside the kit, he grabbed the most basic things he could find: gauze, bandages, antiseptic. Was she bleeding? He wasn't sure, but he couldn't take any chances. He rushed back to his mom, who was still lying motionless on the floor, her breaths becoming more erratic. He knelt down beside her, his heart pounding, his hands trembling as he wiped a damp cloth across her forehead. "Mom," he whispered desperately, "please, please wake up." Her eyelids flickered, and for a moment Noah thought she might respond. But her hand lay limp in his, her breathing shallow, like the very air she was trying to take in was slipping away. His chest tightened painfully. Then he remembered the operator's instructions. Keep her upright. Don't let her fall asleep. His mind raced, trying to remember every detail of the advice, but none of it felt real anymore. It all seemed too distant, too far removed from the chaos he was in. Without hesitation, Noah gently propped his mother up, supporting her back with a pillow. Her head rested against his chest, her body limp in his arms. He kept talking to her, whispering soothing words that he hoped would reach her, even if they couldn't break through the fog in her mind. "Mom, please, just breathe. Come on, you have to fight. Please, stay with me." Her breathing was so faint, Noah wasn't sure if she could even hear him. But he wasn't going to stop. He wouldn't give up on her. She had always been the one to take care of him, to keep him safe. Now, it was his turn to be the strong one. He pulled out the bandages and wiped them across her face, trying to keep her cool. He needed to keep her calm, needed to keep her from panicking. But he was the one who was panicking. His hands fumbled with everything, dropping supplies, almost dropping her. But he kept trying, kept moving, kept holding her, even though he felt like everything was slipping from his grasp. He felt a tightness in his chest, like a vice slowly closing around his heart. His mom's condition was worsening by the second. He couldn't wait any longer. The operator hadn't given him anything to go on. There was no one there to help him. His hands were all he had left. In desperation, he grabbed his mom's face gently, cradling it in his hands. Her eyes fluttered open again, weak but focused for a split second. "Mom, stay with me," he whispered, his voice shaking with fear. "Please, you have to stay with me." For a brief moment, her lips parted as if trying to speak, but her voice failed her. Instead, she weakly squeezed his hand. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give him hope. His chest still ached with fear, but the tiny flicker of response in her eyes was the light he needed to keep going. Noah wiped away the tears from his face, glancing at the front door. He could hear the sound of sirens in the distance, so close, but not close enough, not fast enough. He couldn't wait any longer. He couldn't stand by helplessly while his mom fought for her life. He took a deep breath, summoning whatever strength he had left. "You're going to be okay, Mom," he whispered fiercely, more to himself than to her. "You're going to be okay. I'm not going to let you go." Noah's hands were slick with sweat as he knelt beside his mother, clutching her fragile body to his chest. Her breaths were coming in strained gasps, each one weaker than the last. He could feel the life draining out of her, could hear the terrifying sound of her lungs struggling to pull in air. Every second counted, but as the distant wail of sirens grew louder, it was as if time had frozen around him. "Mom, you have to fight. You can do this. I'm here. You're not alone." Just as he was about to lift her again, desperate to keep her awake, he heard something that made his blood run cold. A sudden sound came from the phone. It was faint, but unmistakable. The operator's voice, still coming through, her words suddenly audible once again. "Noah," the voice said, cutting through the heavy silence in the room. "Noah, are you still there?" His heart skipped a beat. He hadn't even realized he'd left the phone on the counter, but now that he heard the operator's voice again, something felt wrong. Why hadn't she hung up? Why was she still there? Noah's mind raced, his thoughts frantically trying to piece things together. He hadn't spoken to the operator in minutes, hadn't heard anything from her since the last cold question. So why was she still on the line? He grabbed the phone, his hands shaking, bringing it to his ear with a sense of dread that made his stomach turn. "Yes," he said, his voice tight, unsure of what to expect. There was a pause on the other end, one that seemed to stretch for far too long, and then the operator spoke again, but this time the words sent a chill straight through him. "Noah," she began slowly, her tone colder than ever, "there's something I need to tell you. We've been tracking your call, and, well, there's something you should know." Noah's heart began to hammer in his chest, the blood rushing to his ears. The operator's voice had taken on a strange quality, almost detached, as if she was speaking from a distance, from a place far outside the urgency of the situation. "What are you talking about?" Noah choked out, his voice breaking. "My mom. She's dying. You need to send help now." But the operator's voice remained disturbingly calm. "Help is on its way, Noah. But I have something important to share. We've been tracking your call's location, and there's something you need to understand. Your mother, she isn't in the kind of trouble you think she is." Noah froze. "What?" His head spun, the words refusing to make sense. He could barely process what the operator had just said. How could she say that? How could she possibly know what was happening to his mom? "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, fear creeping into every syllable. "There's been a mistake," the operator said, and her voice suddenly seemed even colder, more calculated. "We've confirmed that your mother is not in medical distress. The symptoms you're describing, they're consistent with a specific condition, but it's not an emergency. She's fine." Noah felt as though the world had just tilted beneath him. He gripped the phone harder, feeling his pulse pounding in his ears. What was she talking about? He looked at his mother, her chest still rising and falling in shallow gasps, her face pale as death. She wasn't fine. "No," Noah breathed, his voice breaking. "You don't understand. She's dying. Look at her. You have to send help." But the operator's response was chilling in its certainty. "I'm sorry, Noah, but we've confirmed your mother's condition. It's not what you think. We can't send an ambulance for something that's not an emergency." The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Noah's mind reeled. What? What does she mean? It couldn't be true. There had to be some mistake. His mother was still gasping for breath, her lips nearly purple from lack of oxygen, and the operator was telling him that it wasn't an emergency. For the first time, doubt crept into Noah's mind. His gut twisted painfully, his heart sinking. Could it be possible? In that moment, everything shifted. The air in the room seemed to grow heavier. Noah's thoughts collided in a rush. Was this some kind of cruel joke? Why was the operator still so calm, so certain? What was really happening to his mom? Just then, the sound of sirens grew louder, closer than ever. The emergency vehicles were just outside the door now. Noah's body tensed, the hope that help was finally here making his pulse race. But just before the door burst open, just before the paramedics arrived, the operator's final words sent a jolt through him. "Don't worry, Noah. It's just a matter of time before everything is revealed." The sound of the sirens blared louder outside, shaking the walls of the house. Noah's heart was a frantic drumbeat in his chest, and his body was frozen, every muscle taut with fear and confusion. The phone line had gone dead, the operator's cold words still echoing in his mind. It's just a matter of time before everything is revealed. What did that mean? Was his mother's condition some kind of twisted mistake, or was there something far darker happening here? His mind was spinning, but his focus remained solely on his mom. He could still feel her frail body in his arms, her skin icy and pale, her breaths now coming in shallow, almost imperceptible gasps. Every moment felt like an eternity, and with every passing second, Noah felt the grip of dread tightening around his chest. The paramedics arrived at the door with a rush of frantic energy. The sound of boots hitting the floor echoed in the hallway as they rushed in, two of them immediately kneeling beside his mother. They were fast, professional, but Noah could still feel the strange weight of the operator's words pulling him back from the immediacy of the situation. He watched helplessly as the paramedics worked, their hands moving swiftly, checking vitals, hooking up oxygen, stabilizing her body. One of them glanced at Noah, then back at his mother, and gave a small, reassuring nod. "She's in a critical condition," the paramedic said, his voice firm but calm. "We're going to do everything we can." Noah's mind was spinning. What did the operator mean? His thoughts spiraled, tangling with fear, confusion, and the sense that something wasn't right. Is she going to be okay?" Noah choked out, his voice raw with emotion. His eyes darted between the paramedics, desperate for any sign of hope. The paramedic didn't answer immediately. He only moved with measured precision, checking his mother's pulse, running through a checklist of tests. But then, after a long, painful silence, he met Noah's gaze, his expression grave. "We need to get her to the hospital immediately," he said, his tone heavier than Noah expected. "Her vitals are unstable, but she's alive. That's what matters right now. We'll have more answers once we get her there." Noah nodded, his throat tight. His heart was still racing, but now there was a glimmer of something. Maybe hope, maybe just the relief that someone was finally taking control of the situation. They carefully lifted his mom onto the stretcher and began to wheel her toward the door. Noah followed them out, his mind still racing with the operator's last words. He didn't know if he believed it all, couldn't even begin to make sense of it. But one thing was clear. His mom was fighting for her life, and he wasn't going to stop until he knew why. As the paramedics loaded her into the ambulance, Noah climbed in beside them, his hand still clutching his mother's, unwilling to let go. The doors slammed shut, and the ambulance sped off toward the hospital, sirens blaring into the night. It was a blur. The city passed by in flashes of light, a jumble of red and white, but Noah couldn't focus on anything but his mom. Was she getting better? Was she worse? Every few minutes, the paramedics would glance at the monitors, adjust something, but it only seemed to deepen Noah's unease. Why did it feel like they were trying to keep something from him? Finally, the ambulance screeched to a halt in front of the hospital. The doors flew open, and Noah was ushered out by a team of doctors who immediately took over. His mind was a whirlwind, but he had no choice but to follow, helplessly watching them rush his mother into the emergency room. But just as the doors slammed shut behind them, one of the paramedics stopped Noah with a hand on his shoulder. "Listen, Noah," the paramedic said, his voice low and intense. "There's something you need to know. The operator you spoke with, we have her on record, and we've reviewed your call." Noah's blood ran cold. What? He felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. "What do you mean?" Noah's voice was barely a whisper. "The operator," the paramedic continued, his eyes scanning the hallway nervously. "The call you made, it wasn't what it seemed. You didn't just dial 911. That operator wasn't a part of our system at all." Noah's legs nearly gave way beneath him. His mind couldn't process what he was hearing. "What are you talking about?" he gasped, gripping the paramedic's arm. "She told me my mom was fine, that it wasn't an emergency." The paramedic's face grew grim. "That's just it, Noah. The operator wasn't part of the emergency dispatch system. We've traced the call. It wasn't from anywhere near here, and it wasn't routed through any of our usual channels." Noah's stomach twisted with terror. "What does that mean? Who was she?" The paramedic looked over his shoulder, his voice barely above a whisper. "We don't know, but I think you need to be prepared for the fact that this might not be just a medical issue. Something's wrong. Something deeper is going on here." The words hung in the air, and Noah's heart stopped. The doors to the ER burst open as the medical team hurried in, but he couldn't tear his eyes away from the paramedic. "Noah," the paramedic said one last time, his face pale. "There's a lot we're not telling you yet, but this may have started a lot earlier than you think. This might not be over." With that, the paramedic turned and rushed into the emergency room, leaving Noah standing frozen, his heart hammering in his chest. The sound of the ER doors slamming shut felt like a final warning, and as Noah stood there, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of the nightmare. It was only just beginning. "What do you think is really going on here? Was the operator hiding something? How do you think this story will end? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're captivated by this mystery, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more shocking stories and twists you won't want to miss.